All right.
Kris Newby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Evan.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think your goal has been achieved with this book because I just saw a news article over the weekend that the U.S. House of Representatives just passed a bill because of your book, where now we're going to try to figure out what the truth is about whether ticks were used as bioweapons or not. Was that your original goal going into this thing?
Well, I had two wishes at the end of the book after I told my very compelling Cold War uh, thriller about tick weapons. I mean, at the end, I say, I want a congressional hearing so that we can really know what tick-borne diseases were released where and when. Because around the 70s, all these freaky diseases turned up, chronic fatigue, Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, etc. And no one has ever really thought about, well, why did they all appear at this time? So, my book is basically putting together a case that some of these diseases these chronic disabling diseases may be part of the military's chronic disabling tick-borne weapons program.
Yeah, it's amazing. Part of the book that tripped me out the most was the fact that Chris's book, it's titled Bitten: The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Warfare. And it's actually, I didn't know if you know this, it's like a #1 bestseller in the category of biological warfare on Amazon. Did you know that?
I did know that. It's been hovering around there.
Good job. So great job. That's amazing. So part of the book that really tripped me out was, and correct me if I'm wrong when I pronounce or state this stuff, but that some of these documents that you had uncovered stated that the goal of these bioweapons, these tick bioweapons, was not to kill people, but it was to disable people enough to where they couldn't work. And specifically, there was this mention of, I believe it was sugar plantations down in Cuba, and that was going to be like one of the test sites for this.
Yeah.
Did
So
I?
yeah. So this was after the Bay of Pigs. Robert Kennedy was really mad at how we were devastated in the Bay of Pigs operation in 1961, and they wanted revenge. They wanted to injure Fidel Castro, the communist dictator on that island. They wanted to injure his economy and cause an uprising that would oust him. So one of their many plots, and this was just Task 33B, there were about 100 sort of evil plots to get rid of Fidel, including assassination. But this operation was to harm their #1 cash crop, which was sugar. So they took ticks that had dangerous diseases in them. And I don't know what disease it is, I just know they were infected. It was probably Venezuelan equine encephalitis or tularemia. But anyways, they dropped a couple boxes of ticks on the sugarcane workers to see if they could injure them, the workers. And so, they wouldn't be able to harvest. But what they found out is that the person who dumped the ticks, his son, he brought a tick home to his home in Texas, and his infant son got sick and almost died. And it was also, they canceled this program because they said it's too hard to control the ticks when you dump them out of a plane. Ideally, if you're developing a weapon, you want it to be able to locate the ticks precisely. So it sounds like some weird, science fiction film, but there's plenty of documentation that there was a rather large program to use ticks as basically eight-legged soldiers. And there was an arm of that program that put lethal diseases in them, and then an arm that put chronic incapacitating diseases in them.
It's amazing. So some of the pictures in your book are mind-blowing. There's one specific picture where Willy Burgdorfer, so if people hear the name Borrelia burgdorferi, that's named after Willy Burgdorfer, who you discuss in the book and who you got to interview, which we should talk about that. That's pretty awesome. But one of these pictures was really creepy, which is where there were ticks kind of lined up in, I guess you just call it like a holding box. These ticks were sort of suspended in this little box, and then there were glass tubes or pipettes going into the ticks. And this was the way that the ticks were fed various diseases. And there was another mention in that book too about Utah, and there was some kind of crazy experiment. Can you tell us about what happened in Utah with dropping ticks?
So in Utah, the Army set up Dugway Proving Grounds, which is sort of in a desert uninhabited area, and they did all their sort of environmentally dubious experiments for bioweapons and chemical weapons there, including nerve gas. So when Willie came from Switzerland, he was a medical zoologist to work at the Rocky Mountain Lab. He was immediately enlisted in this biological weapons program, and his job in the first couple years was to put bubonic plague in fleas, yellow fever in mosquitoes, and then dangerous tick-borne diseases in ticks, and to get the right combination so that the tick and the organism could live in the climate where you wanted to drop them, and then they did like hundreds and hundreds of pilot studies to say if you drop fleas or ticks or in an area, how far do they creep? How many creepy miles per hour do they go? So anyways, Dugway was used for that. They scratched a bullseye, a grid on the desert floor. They put guinea pigs in cages all around there. Then they had jets drop fleas. These were uninfected fleas, but they were just doing a study to see how far they would creep. And so the fleas dropped, and then some technician went and collected all the guinea pigs and counted how many fleas were on them. They dropped about over 400,000 fleas, and about 200 of them ended up, I think, on the guinea pigs. And who knows where the other fleas went, but they said this experiment was a success because we realized we could cover a battalion-sized area with infected fleas if we needed to. Now you back that up and think, wow, like, why didn't anybody think of the larger implications of doing an experiment like this? Like, we're talking about bubonic plague. It's the disease that wiped out 3/4 of Europe in the 14th century, and is that really a smart thing for humanity? Could you potentially end mankind by an experiment like that?
The creepiest part of it is this was all going on, this whole Utah experiment. This was in the 1960s as well?
Yes, 50s and 60s.
50s and 60s. Okay, so, I mean, that's a long time ago. When I read through your book, I thought, okay, if they had this ability to do that then, what the heck is going on now? I mean, do you have any idea of any, like, I guess Willie probably didn't want to open up too much, but I wonder if this type of programming and experimentation is still going on, like at that Rocky Mountain facility or other facilities?
Well, biological weapons were officially banned. The program was banned in '68 by Nixon. And there have been inspections by neutral parties after that, and it appears that it's shut down. But, the thing is, we still have a defensive biological weapons program, and so we have to maintain cultures of these germs that are deadly or incapacitating in some lab. So, if the wrong person came into power, they could easily turn that bioweapons program back on because we still have those cultures. But as far as I know, the United States isn't doing it anymore. I have little faith that Russia has shut theirs down.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, so Connecticut, it was called Lyme, Connecticut. This is sort of supposedly like the birthplace of Lyme and potentially co-infections. I was like up late reading your book. I can't remember. Did you discuss Lyme, Connecticut at all? Like, do you believe that
Yes.
there were escapees from there? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, if I'm in Kentucky and I got bit by like 5 or 6 ticks last year and I tested positive for Bartonella, it makes me think, okay, did that tick just have Bartonella on its own? Was this a tick that spread over the last 50 years from Connecticut that was injected with Bartonella? I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I do, because you have to realize this biological weapons program was as big as the Manhattan Project and as secretive. And so there were multiple sites around the United States where experiments were being conducted. Now, around your area, in the Midwest, I wouldn't say your area, but Pine Bluff, Arkansas, was the huge germ factory for the United States bioweapons program. And there they had these giant stainless steel tanks, like you'd use at Coors beer brewery, and in those tanks they would brew anthrax and brucella, all these germs, and then they would take them and they would freeze dry them, aerosolize them, make them into particles, and mix them with a food stuff. So you have these bacterial spores, and then you could spray them in a wet or dry slurry from planes, from boats, from trucks with a blower on the back. They did an experiment where they blowed bacteria in the Pentagon ventilation system. That was a non-lethal, they thought, bacterium. So the objective of that was large area coverage. They called it LAC. So it would be a way to incapacitate a whole city. Or it could be lethal, but so you'd incapacitate a city, and instead of killing people, and that would take one undertaker, you would have people that were chronically ill, and it would tie up the ER, it would tie up multiple healthcare workers, family members, workers, but you wouldn't destroy the infrastructure. So you'd still have the guy alive who knew how to run the power plant or the shoe factory. You'd have the intellectual assets there, and you wouldn't. It's not like a bomb where the buildings would be crushed and you have to start around zero.
It's a lot smarter of a weapon, it sounds like, then.
It's sneaky, yeah, but
Wow.
the potential. But it's sort of human hubris to think that we can control nature like that.
It is.
So there's a lot of risks.
So the interesting thing about the media is weird. If you just look up your name, you just put Kris Newby, you put news, you go look at news. People love to use the word conspiracy to discredit people. And so, I think it was, San Francisco Gate 5 days ago. This is just so annoying how they titled these news articles. It says, House measure on weaponized ticks revives discredited conspiracy theory. And basically, in my opinion, when I read a headline like that, they don't even want you to look into your book. They don't even want you to learn the truth. They just want to say, hey, this is discredited. I mean, how the heck does the media even come up with stuff like this? Do they even have any, how do they come up with this, quote, it's discredited already, that this was real? I mean, to me, there's no question. When you read through, you look at the data, you look at the pictures, how could the media say it's discredited?
Well, that's the challenge. I mean, I worked really hard in the book to document everything and be very clear about what we know and what we don't know. So what we know is there was a huge tick weaponization program. We had little factories mass producing ticks. We put all sorts of diseases in them. We ran a lot of pilot studies, and we dropped infected ticks at least once on the Cubans. We released aggressive man-biting Lone Star ticks in Norfolk, Virginia, so we could measure how far they creep per year. And before, these horrible ticks, they're swarmers. They're the only ticks in the U.S. with eyes, so they can stalk their prey. They don't just sit on a blade of grass and wait for you to walk by. And so, a year after that 3-year experiment, all of a sudden those Lone Star ticks traveled on the backs of birds to Long Island, and the first ones were seen there. And those buggers, they can live underwater 70 days. They can live in the freezer for a long, long time. And they spread disease faster than the native ticks.
Wow. And this is the Lone Star?
Lone Star, yeah. But my point is, the book is very well documented. So part of what's happening with the media, and I don't know, it's like for a person who's always cared so much about telling the truth and making things factual, it's very distressing that I see what's happening in the media right now. But this issue, first of all, thank goodness for Representative Smith calling attention to it and saying there's enough credible evidence here to launch an investigation. But he's a far-right Republican, so all of a sudden weaponized ticks became a partisan issue. So you had people knocking it down just because of the person who waved the book around. So that's one factor going on. Then you have the people that don't want this information out, which, that might be the military or the people who have power with tick-borne diseases right now. Because, wow, just think how they must feel. This science writer at Stanford just told them, you missed the biggest scientific scoop of your career. You missed that there's this other thing that's not Borrelia burgdorferi that may be making people chronically ill, and it's weaponized, and you missed it. You missed it under your watch. So there's those people that today they were in the Washington Post saying it's someone who knows the truth, saying, well, Borrelia burgdorferi, and there's no way that can be a bioweapon because it was first identified when the Neanderthals, the last ice age in a Neanderthal or whatever. And it's just like,
I heard of that. That's so stupid. The whole like Iceman thing. They say, yeah, the Iceman up in, where was it? Somewhere in Russia or something. He was frozen. He thawed out. And they said, yeah, Lyme existed 5,000 years ago. There's no way it's a new thing. Is that?
Well, you can tear that down in a couple different ways. First of all, my book doesn't say that Borrelia burgdorferi was weaponized, and Willy Burgdorfer didn't say it was. He said it was another weaponized bacteria. So, I mean, what he was implying is saying that all this disease around Lyme, Connecticut was caused by this spirochete. Willie was saying that's not true. There was another thing that was covered up. So by them coming out and trying to discredit the book by saying Lyme could never be there, it's a distraction again, a misdirection from the real problem, which is this mixed bacteria virus that nobody's looking for.
Yeah, I mean, what do we have a name? Is there a name for it? Is there, like, what do you call it? I mean, you see so many people with chronic fatigue now, and I see a huge link when I go through a history with a client. I say, tell me about your history. Where'd you live? Where'd you grow up? Do you like hiking? Do you go camping? How many tick bites have you had? What about fleas on your pets? And everybody has a story of being bit by something like that.
Yeah, so, I suspect that chronic fatigue is caused by a virus, and that's different than this chronic Lyme disease thing. But back to your question about why would these biological weapons be in different spots in the country, and that's because we did drops and pilot studies in different parts. And I know when the first sort of strange outbreak happened, Willie started investigating it in the mid-'70s. It was near Land Between the Lakes in Kentucky. I don't know if you know where that is.
Oh, yeah. It's like 2 hours west of me. I know exactly where it's at. It's like a huge piece of protected land now, and on each side you've got, I want to say, I guess it's a lake on each side that connects to maybe the Kentucky River. I need to know my state geography and topography better. But yeah, it's a huge chunk of land. So what happened there?
So that was the first outbreak of dangerous spotted fever that Willie investigated. They were concerned because people were dying. So, I look at that and I say, wow, there's an Army airborne division, the 101st, right near there, they were the people who first sprayed Agent Orange on Vietnam. So were they also doing small scale tests on this bioweaponized rickettsial virus thing? So that's a question I have, and that's the kind of question that I can't get to those documents because they're classified. I've tried with Freedom of Information requests, but if there's a congressional investigation, possibly they can get those. And then we would know, okay, what diseases that they release in what areas, and then we can screen people for those diseases and hopefully treat them properly.
Wow. That's a trip. When you say that, what I visualize is in a few years from now, hopefully we'll have a map of the U.S. and we can see and we can plot the drop points on there. And then we can do a layer. I'm thinking data here. We could take a layer of all these people that were surveyed with these symptoms, chronic fatigue, joint pain, dizziness, and put that layer over and see if the layer of symptoms correlates with the layer of the drops.
Exactly. If you want to see a really good example of that, go to ProPublica and Google bombs in our backyard. So that's a map of all the sort of military munitions and bomb dumps where toxic things may have leaked out. So you could do the same thing with the insect experiments, and it would inform health. So, I mean, one of the problems with our tick-borne disease surveillance right now is it's a passive system. So it's very decentralized by county health departments. And, county health departments, some of them have very little funding, and then they get distracted by Ebola or Zika or dengue or whatever, and they just miss a couple of years of surveying ticks and seeing what ticks are where, how far are they spreading, what's in them. But if we had a national policy that was funded, and that's what the CDC suggested in April, they're finally saying, oh my gosh, this tick-borne disease problem is just out of control. So they're going to have more of a national plan and a more strategic and methodical survey of ticks. But if we knew what ticks were released where, that would save money. It would save money with the local health departments. It would save with healthcare costs.
That's the way to market it, is the saving money thing, because it sounds expensive to do a huge like nationwide study to figure out what's where and do a huge survey. And how do you do it? Like, do you go out in the woods and try to gather a bunch of ticks? I mean, it sounds hard to do.
Well, yeah, it's very low tech the way they collect ticks. They have basically a white square of flannel on a stick. It looks like a surrender flag. And they walk through a field or a forest and drag it on the ground. And then they have tweezers and they pick the little ticks off and put them in vials. And it's also dangerous to the people who have to do it.
It sure is. I know, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, oh, God, I don't want to be the guy with the surrender flag walking through the woods.
I know. And that was once called one of the worst jobs in America, a tick collector.
I believe it. I believe it. So let's give people more backstory. You know, I jumped just like straight into the meat of your book. But what led you to this? I mean, did you get sick with Lyme yourself? Did you have some mysterious health symptoms? You got bit by ticks? Like, how would you get so interested in something so important like this that nobody else is looking at or talking about?
Well, in 2002, my husband and I and our two sons in middle school went on vacation to Martha's Vineyard, which is off the coast of Massachusetts. And we were sailing around and we landed on this little island. It's a sandbar of an island. It used to be an Army target practice sort of bar of sand. So it had military roots. It had gun turrets on it and stuff. So anyways, we went there and then, you know, we had a great vacation for a week. And then a week later we went home to California and my husband and I got sicker than we'd ever been before. I was just so sick. I was so weak. I had to crawl on my hands and knees to get up to my bedroom at night. And finally on a Sunday night, we said, we can't go to work tomorrow. We have to go to the doctor. You know, something is so seriously wrong. And so then we started, you know, march. Anybody who's had a chronic disease, you start marching from doctor to doctor to doctor. So, and this happened for a year. And every day for that year, pretty much, we'd get worse. And, you know, finally about 6 months into it, it was just like, oh my gosh, I think we're dying, you know. But that year of a mystery illness. And it was classic late-stage Lyme symptoms, I would say. So it was serious neurological problems, GI problems, joint problems. Like my husband couldn't even pick up a drill and, you know, an electric drill and use it. I would get lost in my own neighborhood. I remember like the most pathetic thing with the brain fog is I was at a stoplight and I couldn't remember what red, green, and yellow meant. So I just stood there at the stoplight trying to remember what you do when the light's yellow or red. So, and all the way along, we saw every doctor we saw 10 doctors, cost $60,000 to get diagnosed. And every doctor said, hey, this might be Lyme disease, because we were at Martha's Vineyard and that was like number 2 place for Lyme that year. They said, no, Lyme is rare. For both of you to get it would be like winning the lottery. One infectious disease doctor said, you know, I think you guys are making this up. I think you're a pathetic, lonely housewife and you want attention from your successful Silicon Valley director, and you're just making these up. And he's having, he actually said this word, a psychosomatic couples thing. So anyways, finally we got booted out of a major medical center and I went online, and the major medical center at least tested me for Lyme disease and it was positive. And they didn't believe the first test, so they tested again, and it was positive again. So, you know, we had a high suspicion it was Lyme disease. We went to a specialist. Then it took us about 5 years to get rid of, we had 2 tick-borne diseases, which make you really sick if you get both of them. One of them's Lyme disease, and the other one is Babesia, which is used to be a cattle parasite till it crossed over to man. And it's like malaria. It infects your red blood cells. So, so after that, you know, you need 2 different classes of drugs, anti-malarial and antibiotics. So it probably cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical expenses and lost work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Were you all able to work during that time? Because you sounded pretty debilitated.
I was a consultant at home because I was, so I could be closer to my kids. I had to finally close my consulting business down. My husband he just drug himself to work every day because we needed the health insurance. We had this undiagnosed disease. So, and once we found a specialist, we could work after 6 months of treatment. But to totally get rid of it took about 5 years.
Wow. Even 6 months sounds like a long time. So you were on antibiotics the whole time, or you cycled on, cycled off?
Well, our germ loads were really high. And one reason to go with a specialist in tick-borne diseases is because you have to sort of assess how sick they are. If you were to have some combination of antibiotics that would kill every germ in you right away, you would die of toxic shock because the little buggers are so toxic it would overwhelm your waste elimination systems, your kidneys, your livers, your skin. So they start out slow with one broad spectrum antibiotic, and then there's a certain order to kill the tick-borne diseases. So they go through that. So it just takes a while.
Did you have any weird stuff with your vision, any blurriness type issues? That's what happened to me. That's why I first started looking into tick-borne stuff, because my vision started getting blurry. I found out I had mold exposure, which can do the same thing, but I had so many tick bites. I thought, man, there's got to be more people dealing with this weird vision change that I've had.
Yeah, we had photophobia, so really bright lights, and my vision went downhill when that happened.
Did you regain your vision? Like, was it blurry, or how would you describe it? I know it's been a little while, but do you remember what everything looked like, or?
Eye twitches. Definitely, we both had eye twitches, but just photophobia, I think. I would say it's photophobia,
like
but
you
I
had
know.
to wear sunglasses.
Yeah, and I know some people have had serious eye problems, chronic, who've had Lyme disease. So that's not uncommon at all. You can look that up on PubMed and look up Lyme disease and eye problems, and there's plenty of case studies on that.
Absolutely. It's crazy how expensive this can be, and that's the hard part about this is, I mean, you told the story perfectly that you went to 10 doctors and you got blown off by them. So people listening to this, they may say, oh yeah, now that she said it, I got sick after this one trip and I never recovered. I mean, that's a super common story when I'm going through trying to paint a history from somebody, previous to present day, how'd you get here? There's always something along the way that derailed them. But the typical treatment, when my wife got bit, say 2-3 years ago, we went to just a local medical doc and said, hey, I think she's got Lyme. She's got XYZ symptom. And he said, I don't believe you. That's made up. But I could give you a 7-day antibiotic of doxycycline. And that was it. And based on everything I've read and spoke with a lot of smart people, there's no way you can get rid of this stuff within 7 days. Do you know if part of these weapon programs, were they able to change the virulence of these bad guys? Like, were they able to make it to where you couldn't treat it? Was that part of the goal, was make it so hard to detect? I read that part, but make it to where you can't get better from it as well?
Yeah, I mean, Jack Anderson, who's sort of the father of investigative reporting in D.C. in the 60s, he wrote, our biological weapons scientists have not been asleep at the wheel. They've developed rickettsia viral combinations, that's a bacteria plus a virus, for which there is no treatment or cure. And so they would try to develop vaccines for their people, but when it was dropped on an enemy, it would present with a confusing set of symptoms. It wouldn't test positive for anything in their library of tests. And they would, the enemy population would think, oh, it's just a really bad flu season or whatever. But in the meantime, it's the perfect stealth weapon.
Wow. What a trip. I mean, you've seen all these flu vaccine post everywhere. I mean, like, you go down the street, there's Walgreens advertising they're going to give you a free Amazon gift card now if you get a flu vaccine. The people do it and they don't get better. I wonder, I know this is a super broad question, but I wonder if when we see these, quote, flu outbreaks or flu season, do you think we just have a ton of people walking around with these biological weapons in their body and we think it's, quote, flu season, but really it's just winter that suppresses the immune system? And now all of us have, not all of us, but a huge percentage have been infected. And now it's not the flu. It's these little secret weapon flus?
Well, there's been no proof that this happens, but the CDC has a branch in their, they have a division, it's called EIS, the Epidemiological Investigative Service. And they're like the CIA of diseases. And so they're two really young doctors or public health people, and they go out for 2 years in the field and investigate suspicious outbreaks. And, their goal is to say, is this natural or unnatural? Is this the beginning of a pandemic, or is this possibly a hostile biological weapons release? And they have the status of military people, and they're called officers, EIS officers. So that was developed right after World War II to watch out for these biological weapons threats. So they are probably out there looking at it all the time. We might not know if there ever was a breach like that. They're very secretive. I would say, in the 10 years I've been looking into Lyme disease, the CDC, which is the Centers for Disease Control, they're just the worst for keeping things secret.
Why is that? Are they doing it on purpose? They're just trying to let stuff leak out, or why do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't know. It might be their military roots. Because the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, is much better about responding.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen with the government getting involved now? I guess we have to – is this just step one, like getting this bill is step one, and then there's got to be more steps to happen, or is this investigation already so far along that it's definitely going to go through?
It's iffy because we have a very divided Congress. It was voted – thumbs up by all the Republicans and thumbs down by all the Democrats in the House. Now it's in the Senate, and it's in a Senate consensus committee. And that's this amendment is buried in the Defense Appropriations Bill, which is big. And usually that's bipartisan, but it's very partisan this year. So now the senators will sit around and they say, well, this is the Senate version of the bill. This is the House Senate of the bill. What stays in, what stays out? And so right now, a bunch of Lyme patients and advocates are trying to talk to their congresspeople and say, all you have to do is call or email and say, hey, this tick investigation is really important to public health. And hopefully they'll keep it in because it's not that expensive, and not like a new fighter jet.
Yeah, those are expensive, like $35 million bucks, I think, for a fighter jet.
Yeah. So anyways, it's iffy. I don't know. And then there's a question, if the Department of Defense is investigating this, will they really release that information?
See, that's the hard part. So
right.
How can people, what's the best way? Is there a particular, I was trying to look up the number of it. It has a number to it, doesn't it, this House measure or the bill?
Yes, it's called the Smith Amendment, and it's 116-19.
Okay, 1116-19.
Yeah, it's review and report on experimentation with ticks and insects. The Inspector General of the Department of Defense shall conduct a review whether the Department of Defense experimented with ticks and other insects regarding use as a biological weapon between the years 1950 and 1975.
Wow. Okay. So the best way for people to try to put effort into getting this through, get a hold of local congressmen?
Yeah, just send them a quick email and say, this is a good thing.
And just say, support this.
Yeah. I would say from a communication standpoint, it's been harder to make people believe it. There's a lot of laughter, like nervous laughter. It's not something you really want to believe about your government. So I'm trying really hard to get it out of the conspiracy theory realm because
I hate that it's even had that label attached to it with some of these news articles. It's just ridiculous. If you read the book from cover to cover in one sitting like I did, because I couldn't put it down, I was simultaneously biting my nails and flipping through. Not literally, just figuratively. I might have bit my nails. It was intense. It was an intense read. Some of those pictures you had of those giant, what'd you call them? It was like a big metal balloon.
8-ball.
The 8-ball. And you had these guys looking in. There was like this little door, this little portal where they could look in and like watch the bacteria or the viruses in there.
Yeah, so it's a 1 million liter sphere that is made of steel. It's like 2 inches of steel or something like that. It was made by submarine welders. And it's an aerosol test chamber. So they would put animals in it or humans, and then they would spray biological weapons on them. And then some were vaccinated, some weren't, to find out the perfect dosages, so that those little particles would be breathed in and they would settle in your lungs and then get into your bloodstream. So there was a lot of human tests. That was called Project Whitecoat. And the human test subjects were mostly Seventh-day Adventists who didn't want to go to Vietnam. So they were conscientious objectors. So rather than being sent to the front lines in Vietnam, they volunteered for these medically supervised experiments.
Wow. Now, like I said, I may have not absorbed all the knowledge. I absorbed some crazy things in the book. I need to read it again. Did you go into detail what happened with those people after all those experiments?
I just had one line. I had a Dietrich contact who took me on a tour of the 8-ball, which is crazy looking, but it's like out of, some Captain Nemo, Jules Verne novel.
Was it still in the same location that it was originally?
It is. It used to have a building around it, and that burned down, but they can't tear it down. I mean, it's sort of an embarrassment, the human experimentation, but they can't tear it down because it's a historic monument. So what they've done is they've surrounded it with 3 other buildings, so you can barely see it, on 3 of the 4 sides. But
what was the feeling in the air of that place? I mean, did it feel like a creepy location when you were there? Did you get a sense of things being off?
There's like a dumpster underneath it with a biohazard label on it. It's just like, I want to get out of here.
And so you did that research for the book, right? You headed there. You're like, I got to see this thing.
Yeah. So I was talking to a few people who worked there to see if they had heard of any tick-borne experiments. And I don't know, to even get on Dietrich, you have to have a background check, which takes about 25 minutes. You have to sit in their little waiting room. And so I don't know if they were checking me out or I was checking them out. I don't know if they trusted me, but they, they didn't give me any breakthrough information, but I just thought it was really important to see the place so I could write about it authentically.
But you could feel in the air there was a weird energy there, because people talk about that, and a lot of people poo-poo this idea. Like, people talk about Auschwitz and say, oh, it has an energy to the air. You can feel, the horror of the place. Did you pick up on any sensations like that?
No, not there. But for example, Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Definitely there's ghosts at Gettysburg. I mean, that was sort of intense.
Yeah. Oh, man. What a trip. But yeah, so back to my original tangent, and then we were talking about how you have a picture where these guys were looking into this 8-ball. There's no question that's real. So I just hope and pray that, and I don't want to think I'm that awesome, but I hope that with getting 20 to 30,000 people or more, hopefully a couple people will call. I mean, what's the timeline of this thing? I mean, we're in, late 2019 now. Do you know how long people have? Like, when are we going to know whether this thing goes through or not?
So I think the Senate, the congressional August break, ends in about 2 weeks. So if you call or email, just say, keep it in, the Smith Amendment into the Defense Appropriations Bill, they count every call and email. And so they'll flag it, when they're in the consensus committee, hey, 1,000 of your constituencies want this to go through. Let's leave it in.
Yeah, if you said it's cheap, I guess the only reason I could foresee if it's cheap, why they would take it out, would be somebody doesn't want it to get out.
Well, just think about the legal implications.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, what?
The damages with Agent Orange, Tuskegee experiment, the SHAD, that's a shipboard hazard program where they sprayed biological simulants from boats. One went up and down San Francisco with a simulant bacteria, live bacteria, and they said, yeah, we could cover a whole area of San Francisco with a germ this way. And they thought it was harmless, but actually people died and ended up in the ER at Stanford after that experiment.
When was this?
In the late 50s.
What was that called?
SHAD, SHAD. It's shipboard hazard. Just look up SHAD Wikipedia, and you can read about those series of tests. They did it off Alaska, Newfoundland. Um,
See, that's
they used Navy tugboats.
that's crazy. See, that's the hard part. So, as you mentioned, even if this does get through and it gets investigated and everything is proven true, then what happens? Then everybody with chronic fatigue is going to go and say, well, okay, well, who's going to pay me now? Who's going to give me the money for my illness I've suffered for 30, 40 years? You know, like, well, let's just say it does go through. How would you foresee things playing out? Maybe you haven't thought that far, but I want to ask you now.
Well, I did this documentary on Lyme disease, Under Our Skin, and that was deeply moving to me because the director, Andy Abrahams Wilson, and we interviewed just hundreds of people with these chronic disabling diseases, tick-borne diseases. And, I just realized the scope of the epidemic, and we can't afford to ignore it. There's a small group of academic researchers who say Lyme disease is easy to treat and easy to cure. It's just the biggest problem is fear of Lyme disease. And, that wasn't what I was seeing boots on the ground. I see a complicated disease. I mean, one of the main messages I want people to take away from the book is it isn't just Lyme disease. It's Lyme plus other tick co-infections, and several other tick-borne co-infections are much more deadly than Lyme. So if we don't start nipping this epidemic in the bud, it's going to sink our economy. We need to take action now, just like with, the climate change. It's time to take action and quit putting our heads in the sand.
It's been ignored, and I don't think it can be ignored anymore. If you look at causes of disability in the U.S., depression's at number one now. I remember when I first started podcasting like 7-8 years ago, I said, hey, depression's sitting at number 3 or 4, but I think in the next few years it's going to creep up to the number 1 spot, and it has. Your psychiatrist isn't going to probably test you for Lyme disease. See, that's the problem, is that this gets classified in the whole infectious disease category, so you got to even get to the right doctor to get you to the right infectious disease person, but it's such a small niche that the whole rest of the medical community misses it. They don't see the anxiety and you said you were crawling around. People don't even have a clue how sick you could be from this stuff.
Yeah, you look normal. You don't have AIDS lesions. You don't have children with tiny heads. It's invisible.
It is. It's an amazing concept that these weapons could have escaped, and they did escape. I don't think it's a question. My brain is blown. I do so many interviews, but I'm almost speechless after reading your book, because I thought, wow, this is the answer that everybody in the U.S. is looking for. Like, we all could be victims, but what do you do, though? That's the hard part. You still got to fix yourself. Do you know anything about transferring these to other people? Like, was that in any of the research or any of the stuff you uncovered? Like, you mentioned the guy who he dropped the package onto Cuba, then his son, he brought the tick home, and his son got really sick and almost died. I wonder, or did you come across any info about you can pass this stuff through saliva or sexual intercourse with people, things like that?
So no human-to-human transmission has been funded by the NIH. There have been small studies that find the Lyme disease spirochete bacterium in vaginal fluid and sperm, so live organisms, but that doesn't prove sexual transmission, right? Even though the Lyme spirochete is really closely related to the spirochete that causes syphilis. So those haven't been funded. There's no will, to do that. And there also have been a study in Germany with dogs. So they had a bunch of dogs. Some dogs had it, some didn't, and all of a sudden, all the dogs had it.
Oh, and this is a Lyme spirochete specifically?
Yeah. So was it sexually transmitted saliva, butt sniffing? I don't know.
Right. I know. How could you get it across? Because I test a lot of people's guts doing stool and urine testing, and so I find a lot of different parasites do transfer, and it's hard to say, like, who's going to do the research. So I just have to assume if mom's got the same symptoms as baby and baby's got the same symptoms as dad, the whole family needs a protocol to fix it. And I found where, not related necessarily to Lyme, but possibly these certain parasites, if we make a protocol for dad, we get him on herbs, we retest him, his parasite infection's now gone, 2 to 3 months later, he'll get it back. We'll retest him. Where'd this come from? And you can't go in PubMed and type in, Giardia parasite transfer. There's no information on this. So
Right.
to me, that's like the biggest smoking gun of this whole thing is you could look at somebody and we could ignore these people and say, oh, this sick person with Lyme disease doesn't matter. But the spiderweb effect, if they're with a partner and then they're with 10 partners and it turns out to be sexually transmitted, it seems like it'd be very easy to spread this thing nationwide. And when I interviewed Neil Nathan, he said there's no part of the country that doesn't have ticks now.
Yeah.
And
climate change is part of that. And change in deer, like deer populations exploding, and people living in some remote areas, and fragmentation of ecosystems. So all that definitely makes the problem worse. If there was this release in the late 60s, it would make it worse. Good
point. Yeah, I didn't even mention that. That'd be a whole other hour for us to discuss. But with the main predators gone in Kentucky, for example, we don't have wolves like we used to. We still have bears in the eastern part of the state, but the tick population is so big because we have 1 million deer. We have 4 million people in the state and 1 million deer. Is that not insane?
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a couple friends at the Fish and Wildlife Department, and I'm just like, what are you guys going to do? And it's an unlimited deer hunting, just completely unlimited. You can kill so many, and then you have to get a tag, and you can kill more. But the population is so out of control here. I don't know if you see many deer where you are. You said you're in Palo Alto.
In the foothills, I do. But I call deer tick Motel 8s. That's where the female ticks go to lay their eggs, and they lay 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. And there have been large mammals like that dying of blood loss, actually, because they get so many ticks on them, especially the Lone Star tick, which they're swarming, and
I did not know that. So ticks go to, is it just any larger mammal in general, or specifically deer are the best target for the ticks to lay eggs?
I don't know the answer to that. I just know that in the winter, like a nice warm deer is probably a good place to go.
Oh man, I always wondered that. But then see, you brought up that tick earlier, and you said that they survive in freezers for long days. So I always think, we try to pay attention in the winter here, like only go on certain really thick hikes in certain parts of the winter. I haven't picked up a tick in the winter. So I wonder, did they used to get killed off and then now they're surviving because the winters aren't as cold? I've got a lot of unanswered questions about that.
Well, I know there's some studies on that, so you'd have to look them up. I know spotty studies.
I'll tell you this. When I was a kid...
Definitely the warming trend in the north is letting the ticks spread farther.
Yeah, when I was a kid in Kentucky, we had a foot of snow would be regular, and now it's like you maybe get a dusting. So it's not a good thing to be in the woods. But you don't want to have fear. That's the hard part. I love hiking in the woods. What about you? How do you balance that? Do you have fear about nature? Do you go out and do hikes and camping? Are you into that thing? Did it scare you away after your experience?
I just am mindful about where I go and tick checks. So, and if I did pull out a tick, I would treat myself right away. Because, there's no controversy about Lyme disease. If you treat it right away with certain antibiotics, you won't have a problem, mostly. So that's the thing to do is, and in some states that have a big problem now, that's what they do. You go to the ER and give them a tick, and they give you a couple weeks of doxycycline. And to me, that's the right thing to do because it's a risk calculation that you need to make.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, the potential years of suffering, or could you possibly knock it out? Have you contacted or spoken with the people from Tick Report? They're up, don't quote me exactly where they are. I know they're up in the east somewhere, but people mail in ticks. They're a lab. I want to say they're a lab at a university. I should remember the guy's name. I interviewed him. But basically people mail in ticks and they can test it. Those would be awesome resources or friends for you to have. That way, for one, they could educate more people about your book. But I wonder how many things they're seeing testing these ticks that they can't explain. Like, I wonder if these people actually have the raw data that you may be missing. Like, what other infections are out there that they're seeing and finding, but they can't explain how the heck they got there.
Yeah. So one pretty exciting new service is sponsored by Bay Area Lyme Foundation, and they're doing free tick testing nationwide. And so you send a tick into them, put it in a plastic bag with a damp piece of cloth, and they'll use advanced gene sequencing equipment to sequence every pathogen in that tick you send in. So that's providing already really valuable information on what ticks are in what counties with what diseases. And then you know how to treat them, because they all take a different drug cocktail.
Wow, that's a trip. And that one virus, I may pronounce it wrong. Is it called rickettsia?
Oh, so rickettsia. That's the bacteria. That's the family of bacteria that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Okay.
Very deadly if you don't catch it.
Yeah, I've seen that in Indiana, which supposedly, if you ask the CDC or other people, they'll say that Rocky Mountain spotted fever is not in the East, but it is. I've seen it. I've seen people getting it.
Yeah.
Wow, what a trip. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is awesome. I highly encourage people to go pick up this book. So it's Kris Newby with a K, K-R-I-S, Newby, N-E-W-B-Y, and the book is called Bitten. Does it matter where people purchase the book? Don't they pay you a little bit more if they buy it directly from somewhere versus Amazon? Amazon takes all the money.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to get the word out. But there's audiobooks, and they're on CDs and Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So, or publisher.
Did you do the narration of your audiobook?
No, I didn't. HarperCollins gave me a choice between 3 people, and I picked her.
Oh, sweet. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to the audiobook, but I bought it on Kindle. That way I could search specific things and try to go straight to that page. So highly recommend you all get it. If your mind is not blown after you read it, then please email me and say my mind is not blown, and I'll have to help you, because your mind should be blown. This book is amazing. Thank you so much for everything you've done. We'll have to check in with you, hopefully a few months, 6 months, a year. Let's see where things go with this. But I hope you sleep better at night knowing that you've created a huge spark into people looking at this and even having the discussion. Even if they throw the stupid conspiracy word into it on the mainstream media, to me, it's still a win, because this conversation has to be had. And so thank you so much for what you've done.
Oh, thanks. And hopefully everyone will remember to do tick checks now. So
yes.
Mission accomplished.
Absolutely. Some of them are so dang small. My wife and daughter, we love hiking. We found one on the back of her neck so small. I mean, I thought it was a speck. I mean, I thought it was a freckle. It was smaller than a freckle.
Yeah.
I mean, that if I could eradicate one thing from the planet, I think it would be ticks. What would it be for you? One small thing, one creature.
Well, I'm into balance. I think we need everything, but we need balance. Oh. So that's what I'm into.
There's too many. That's a good answer. There's too many ticks. Supposedly possums eat them.
Fewer deer, and fewer ticks. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Balance.
I agree. That is the key. Well, thanks again. You take good care.
Well, thanks a lot, Evan.